Hello and welcome to this presentation entitled Abundance, Freedom and Success Through Healing Your Subconscious Wounds. Now this is a very interesting title because I think it's extremely precise. It represents the idea that a lot of us want to manifest abundance and we want to be free. We want to be successful in all sorts of areas of life, right? And we're all trying to manifest that success or that abundance or that freedom, or even trying to buy it or whatever it is. And this title is suggesting that the easier, faster, more sure, guaranteed way to get that abundance, freedom, and success is not really by trying to manifest it directly, but it is by healing your subconscious wounds. In other words, it is by getting out of your own way. That's what this title is suggesting. Now, let's get started right away. And first of all, you'll notice that we have in front of us two circles. On the left, we've got a circle that says unconscious, asleep, and it also says wound. And then you've got arrows pointing to the right to a circle that says conscious, in brackets or braces, awareness, awakening, healing. That's the journey we're going to take. That's the journey we're going to take right here, right now. Okay? And I guarantee you that you're going to understand exactly how to heal your wounds. And when you do that, you will definitely get into the abundance, freedom, and success that you desire. It might even look different from what you currently desire now, because a lot of the desires are actually coming from the wound itself. But anyways, let's not jump ahead of ourselves. Let's dive right into it, okay? Now, before you leave this first screen, by the way, I just want to mention something. A lot of us talk about, relieving our subconscious blocks and, blockages, or some people call them, or blocks or whatever. And I want to make clear right now that that is the wound we are talking about. Then other people talk about healing the inner child. That is the wound we are talking about, you see. Other people talk about making the subconscious conscious. That is the wound we are talking about. We're talking about bringing the wound from somewhere where it's hidden, or we've been trying to cover it up, and making it conscious. That is all part of the awakening process, the awareness process, the healing process. So what we're talking about here is actually not new, but it's just presented in a way that's just gonna make so much sense. I've simplified it and made it so easy and practical for you. So let's get started right away, right? And of course, we shall start with the wound, because we need to understand how our ego works. We're always talking about the ego. We're always talking about the voice in our head messing with us. We're always talking about our uncomfortable emotions, our fears, our thoughts messing with us. This is precisely what we're going to understand. And all this is actually part of the wound. Okay? And so now you're about to understand why that wound is actually hidden in your subconscious in a way that we can comfortably say that we're actually asleep to it. We're not conscious of it. It's kind of running us. It's running our lives. Some would even say ruining our lives, but it's running our lives from the background. That's why we call it subconscious. Okay. So now we're about to start studying this wound, but I would like to mention one thing. The only reason we're studying the wound is so that we can start to become aware of how it operates. But you don't actually need to figure out your own wound. You only need to understand how all wounds operate. The figuring out of your own particular personal wound will actually be done automatically for you. And we'll look at that when we go into the next circle, which is where we talk about being conscious, aware, awakened, and so on. So don't worry too much about, you don't have to be a professor of wounding here. You just need to be aware of how the system works, generally speaking, okay? Yeah, you don't need to be able to figure wounds out for yourself or for your loved ones or whatever. You just need to sort of know how they operate as a whole, okay? So let's first understand why this matters so much. You see, for many of us, our conscious life seems to be an endless struggle with seemingly random, recurring, unsolvable problems that plague us. However, these are actually our subconscious wounds manifesting themselves in ways designed to give us a chance to face them and thus heal them if we choose to. What I'm saying here is that the struggles that we face in life, the seeming, when we say, oh, the law of attraction is not working for us, or I can't seem to manifest the reality that I choose, or I'm stuck, it's not a random event that is keeping you stuck or, sabotaging your progress. What you're actually experiencing is your wound, your subconscious wound, played out in your waking life. And it's doing this precisely because the law of attraction is working. That wound is creating your reality so that you can face it and you can heal from it. It's part of the system. It's a very clever system, okay? And so, once we now start to understand that we're not experiencing, in quotes, the real world, but what we are actually experiencing is you can say the weather created by our wound. We're actually experiencing the wound itself, and that is what is overshadowing the real world. Then we start to understand that before we can experience reality, before we can experience that simplified manifestation of the reality that we desire, we first have to get out of our own way. We first have to heal the wound, okay? We also start to understand that the wound is part of our very sense of identity. That which we say, I am this, I'm that, I'm always afraid of this, but I'm very able to do that. I can't seem to get ahead in this way, but this and that other thing is easy for me. When a person is making these statements about their capability or lack of capability or whatever, it gives them a sense of self. It gives them that idea that this is me who is unable to do this, or this is me who can't handle this emotion, or this is me who's full of this particular kind of fear. This sense of identity is not really the person. This is not who the person really is. This sensation of identity is actually the wound personified. Okay? You see what I'm saying? When you say, oh, I'm stuck, you're not the one who's stuck. You're talking about your wound. You're experiencing an aspect of your wound that feels like stuckness. You see what I'm saying? So once you start to see this, you start to realize manifesting a reality is as natural as breathing. It's always happening 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's never, even when you're sleeping, when you're awake, there's never a time when manifesting is not happening. Even when it seems to be failing, it's actually working perfectly. But what it's doing is that it is manifesting the wound. Okay, now we'll get into what this wound is. I'm just starting to show you why this is so important. It's so important to know yourself so that you can get out of your own way. Okay, the wound literally is the lens through which we see and experience the world. And until we heal that wound, we continue to see and experience the world through that lens of the wound. And this is what gets in the way of our manifesting. And sadly, this is also where we spend 80% of our efforts, our focus, our time, our energy. Think about it. We're always, the voice in our head is always running, the self-talk. That there's like the way you talk to yourself in your mind, that's on 24 hours a day for everybody. I can confidently say this because that's the condition that plagues like 99.99% of people, you see? And that voice in the head is usually dealing with all the problems and troubles we need to solve. That is what we give 80% of our focus, our time, and our energy. It's something that we spend so much of ourself dealing with. And so the benefit of healing is finally having all that free time, all that focus and energy made available. In other words, we get out of our own way. Finally, that's the benefit of healing. And when you do that, all of a sudden, manifesting your dream, your desires starts to become more and more instantaneous, more and more easy, more and more effortless, up to the point where you don't even think about it anymore. You don't, because you're not struggling with it. doing, you're not fighting yourself anymore. Okay, that's why this is so important. And so, just to wrap up this particular slide, it's important to realize that the wound is the same thing we're referring to. It refers to the same thing as what some people refer to as the wounded inner child, or the cloaked inner child, or the rejected part of the self, the true, the rejected, the true self. There's so many words for it. Okay, yeah. So we are now dealing with the subconscious in a way that, it's incredible what you're about to find out. So now that we've figured out why that is so important, let's get into it and start to understand how wounds are actually created. Great. So wounds are created by unfulfilled true needs. In other words, wounding happens when our true needs are not met, and then we create a false identity to try and cover up that fact that need was unmet. Okay? This is how the ego, or that sense of self, is created as we grow up. From when we're little infants, just freshly born, all the way till adulthood, we accumulate a sense of self, a growing identity. Yeah. But this growing identity is not one single identity. It's identities that are made. There are many, many little identities. When they're all collectively put together, then they look like one persona. Okay? I'll explain exactly how that works. First of all, just look at this list of true needs over here. Yeah. All of us, every human being, has a true need for unconditional love, for acceptance, for being heard or listened to, for being real. We don't want to cover ourselves up. We want to be free to express ourselves, to be real. That's what we really crave, the freedom to express ourselves without fear of being punished or rejected or whatever. We also have a need to have our feelings validated so we don't think we're crazy. We also have a need for sexuality, for freedom, for fun, for nurturing, for safety, for security, for guidance. We also need space to grieve losses. We need support. We need trust. We need loyalty, or in other words, not betrayal. Okay? We need attention, contact, mirroring and echoing, participate. We need to participate, We need to be able to complete our creations without them having been cut off. We need connection, touch, all those things. We need openness to altered consciousness. Yes, the ability, the right to alter your consciousness is part of humanity's true needs. Okay. Now, when any of these needs, and I suppose there are more than these, but when any of these true needs, and by the way, these needs don't just belong to humanity, they belong to many other creatures, mammals, birds, fish, not all of them, but a lot of them. Think about it. Even animals want to be real. Animals want to be safe. They like attention and contact. So these are kind of like they're true needs of creaturehood. When these are denied in one way or another, then a wound happens. Not just when they're denied, sorry. It's like, imagine you're growing up and you needed to be loved, but you are not given love, okay? So then you developed an identity that said there's something wrong with me, that's why I'm not getting the love that I require. You see, that identity that has risen up with a false conclusion that there's something wrong with you and that's why you didn't get love, that is the wound. You see? That is the unconscious ego. That is one identity that's born. And then let's go. Let's stay with you as an example, okay? And let's say at some other point, your need for security was also not fulfilled, or your need for safety. Maybe you assumed you're nice and safe at home and you're sleeping, and then something came and violated your safety in your sleep. And so you became afraid of, I don't know, dark rooms, or afraid of people, or whatever it is. And so an identity formed that said maybe something like you're not safe, So now you've got two different identities that are formed, and over time you form many others, many others. Some identities will be trying to earn love, some will be trying to stay away from people, all sorts of different little identities, and collectively, at some point, you come to believe this is me. You see? False identities, a whole bunch of false identities. They all keep arising whenever a true need is not met, and then we make a false conclusion about us or about life, and that gives rise to a false identity. An aspect of an ego, a bad program, bad line of code in the program, basically. So that's how wounding works, and we're going to learn more and more and more about how wounding is created and how it works. But for now, this is a very, very nice summary. Okay, so there's the list again. I hope that makes sense. Now, let us talk about the different types of wounds. Now, we're talking about very interesting topics regarding human beings. And human beings are very complicated creatures. The body, mind, spirit complex is extremely complicated. So when we try to categorize the types of wounds and say these are the 4 types of wounds, obviously this is just an attempt to categorize something that is very, very deep and complicated. However, we have to categorize just for the sake of learning. Now, this particular category categorization is one that I got from presidelife.com, and there are many other ways to categorize. So I'm not trying to compete with psychologists and psychoanalysts and say that this is the only way to do it and every other way is wrong. No, it's not. This is just one way, but it's a nice and simple way. Now, the types of wounds, according to this particular category system that I've selected for us, are 4. So one type of wound is a capability wound. There's another one which is an identity wound, another one is a body wound, and the other one is a relationship wound. Let's look at them, each one of them. Capability. A capability wound is the feeling, or gives rise to the feeling, that you aren't good enough for something that you feel that you should be good at. Okay, so it's a kind of an inferiority complex. Okay, but in the area of ability to do things or whatever, It could also be feeling that you are too good, too cool for school. So in that way, it becomes a superiority complex. All right? But in either way, it's that sense that your capabilities are not up to par. And even if somebody has a superiority complex and they think they're too good for everybody else, I'm too cool for school, I'm superior to you, that kind of a feeling, it's actually masking an inferiority complex. Superiority, inferiority, they go hand in hand. They share, they're kind of like, you can say, they spring from the same well, So that's a capability wound, okay? An identity wound is the feeling that you are the wrong kind of person, It could be anything. It could be like the wrong race, wrong gender, wrong personality, or just the wrong person in one way or another, And again, just like with the capability wound, it could serve both inferiority and superiority complexes. They both go down to the same root, A lot of people who have superiority complexes and feel too good, like better than other people, at some point they crash down and they really feel inferior. They feel like they've really gone down, So it's the same thing. It's the same mask, just different faces, So that's an identity wound. The first one, capability, was I am, the wrong person to achieve something. Identity is I am just the wrong person. You know what I mean? Yeah. So Then the third one is the body wound. And this is the feeling that there is something inappropriate, inadequate, or wrong with your body physically, okay? That this could be anything. It could be like too tall, too short. Um, you know, there's so many big nose, small nose, too fat, too thin, whatever. Bad hair. Yeah, just there's so many things. Unattractive. Feeling that you're not attractive. Whatever. Somewhere or another, some kind of a shame about the body. And then the relationship wound is the feeling that you should have been loved in a particular way by a particular person or groups of people, but you are not. And this is usually followed by the conclusion that this happened because there's something wrong with you. So as you can see, they all seem to have a interconnection. The capability, the identity, the relationship, and the body wounds. They're all interconnected somehow, and everybody, all human beings, all human beings have all four in various mixes, okay? And various, like for example, I would have several capability wounds, and several relationship wounds, and several identity wounds, and several body wounds, and they all sort of work together and support each other and or contradict each other and so on. So those are the four kinds of wounds. Okay. Great. Now let's have a look at the upbringing conditions that tend to stifle the inner child, that tend to wound the inner child. And by the way, another word for the inner child is the heart. So a wounded heart is the same thing as a wounded child or just the wound. We're actually talking about not necessarily physical heart, not the physical heart, but when we talk about the heart, the metaphysical heart. That's what we're talking about. And I use the word upbringing because that includes parenting. It includes, the parenting that happens within a family, but also the society at large. We all grow up inside our homes, but also outside. There's a lot of factors: peer pressure, or friends, family, relatives, school, society, our country, our nation, our economic class, the neighborhood. So all of those are what we're talking about. We're not just talking about parenting only, although that involves parenting, and in fact, parenting is perhaps the biggest contributor of upbringing. Okay, so now let's look at the conditions that create wounding. Okay, in summary, we can divide upbringing into two columns and say on the left we've got the healthy conditions that ensure that a child grows up without wounding or with minimal wounding, and on the right you've got the unhealthy. Okay. So in the healthy column, I'm going to read line by row. So healthy is not, having a nurturing love or unconditional love, and unhealthy is having conditional love. Healthy is respect of children. Unhealthy is when children are disrespected. Healthy is when children or we are treated as people. Unhealthy is when we are treated as property, either as a child or as an adult, as long as you're treated as property, you'll feel different about yourself, right? You'll conclude different things about yourself. Healthy is when we're valued as humans. Unhealthy is when we're valued for achievements or whether we complied to a rule or whatever, When we don't comply, we're not valued. When we do, we are valued. So there's that conditionality again, right? Healthy is when the communication is open. Unhealthy is when we are not allowed to communicate openly. Healthy is when we have emotional freedom. Unhealthy is when there is emotional intolerance and we're not allowed to have certain emotions. Like literally they're outlawed. And, we're told, the usual, like, you shouldn't cry, or you shouldn't feel that, or you shouldn't feel this, or that's weakness. To feel like that is weakness. And so when certain emotions are shamed or made, in quotes, not allowed, then, that's not healthy either. So healthy is encouragement, and healthy is ridicule. Healthy is when the parenting or the bringing style is consistent, and healthy is when it's chaotic or dogmatic or whatever. Healthy is when there's encouragement, when a child or a person is encouraged to have an inner life, and health is when they're denied an inner life. Health is when social connections are available, and health is when there's social dysfunction. Okay. Now, that was the overall picture. Now let's start zooming in into more and more and more detail, and we're still, we're still going to look at some more general conditions, and then we'll go far deeper and deeper into specifics. And remember what we said before, you don't need to memorize all this. The point of this exercise is to see and understand how the machine works. But you don't have to figure out yours. You don't have to dig up old memories. The past is gone. It's gone already. But you still need to understand how the machine works, your vehicle. How does your vehicle, your body, mind, spirit complex, how does it work? Because that will allow you to know yourself in stage 2 when we talk about healing. Okay? So I'm not asking you to remember how you were raised and dig up memories when you're 3 years old. That's not necessary. But it's important and necessary to learn how your vehicle works, your body, mind, spirit complex. So let's get into it. Obviously, when there's child abuse, and by the child abuse covers physical, mental, emotional, sexual, and or spiritual. It's not just about being bashed physically. It could also be mental, emotional, sexual, and even spiritual. Okay? So children internalize feelings of intense shame and guilt, superiority, inferiority complexes, post-traumatic stress disorders, mistrust of their own feeling, mistrust of others, boundary issues, fear, and that sense of like having to walk on eggshells, and they even develop a crisis orientation to life when they undergo abuse. Okay, so that's one way wounds are created. Okay. Another way is when a child is brought up, or we are brought up under rigidity, punitiveness, judgmentalness, non-lovingness, perfectionism, and enforced inadequacy. Under these conditions, children learn to avoid pain by bottling up tension, always being alert and anxious, and anticipating danger, denying their own needs, working to earn approval, because if they don't get approval, they'll probably get punished or something. They also learn how to stay invisible so they're not noticed and punished. And then they also learn to conform to without even questioning. They learn to shrink, and then they develop various obsessions and so on. That's another way wounds are created. Another upbringing factor is codependence and neurosis. When you're brought up under codependence and neurosis by a neurotic parent or a neurotic society or whatever. So there, the person loses selfhood, and any suffering or dysfunction that is associated with or results from focusing on the needs and behavior of others, resulting in the need. Sorry, I'm going to have to read that once again. So a loss of selfhood, yeah? And what happens here is that the child learns, because they're growing up with a neurotic parent or in a neurotic family or in a family that is very intense on the whole codependency thing, where there are no boundaries and everything, there's no boundaries between the individual members of the family. We all have to look after each other's emotions, be responsible for other people's, needs and behaviors, okay? So the child learns to focus on other people's needs, other people's behaviors, okay? Because they have to respond to them under this kind of a structure. And so what happens is that child ends up neglecting their own true needs, their own true self, because they first check, what does mom need? What does dad need? Or what does the society need of me? And so they forget, what do I need? And they're just spending all their time fulfilling the other people's needs, because that's what happens under codependence and neurosis, okay? So they repress everything, their own needs, their own insights, their own observations, their own feelings, their own reactions. And again, that's a wound, okay? That's a wound that will end up controlling their lives and creating their lives later on when they grow up, unless they heal that wound. Another one is chronic mental or physical illness. When a person grows up under a family or a society that is undergoing chronic mental or even physical illness. Okay, and the way this works is that it's a little bit like growing up in an alcoholic family. Yeah, a little bit. It's almost the same. So here, children are unable to understand why the parent acts the way that the parent does. Remember, if your parent has a mental illness and you don't know that, you'll think they're normal. Okay, so then you'll blame yourself because you'll think you're abnormal, that there's something wrong with you. Because imagine you have a parent with a mental illness, and that parent screams at you for no good reason that you can detect, but the parent is just crazy, right? So you may, as a little child, just think, oh my God, I don't know what's wrong with me, but there's obviously something wrong with me because my parent is screaming at me, but I don't know what I did, but oh my God, there must be something terribly wrong with me. That kind of a conclusion is very simple for a child to get into. And so they just develop this guilt and shame over stuff that they don't really know why, Okay. So this child also ends up having boundary issues, victim issues, and so on. And as they grow up, that carries on. Another general upbringing condition that creates wounds is unhealthy control. When you're controlled too much, you're controlled, like how you feel, what you do, what you eat, how you think, and so on. So this leads to a lack of trust in life, a lack of trust in themselves, amongst many other things. Any person who grows up in such a situation, it could even be a country where there is unhealthy control, like a country that is run by a dictator or a system that disallows freedom, okay, generally tends to lead to a population that has these issues, okay. And the other one, of course, is when somebody grows up under a family that is undergoing alcoholism and or chemical dependence, the children are unaware of why the parent is acting abnormal. The child doesn't know what it is to be drunk. They just see that during the day mom is okay, and then in the evening she's gone crazy, for some reason. They don't understand it's the alcohol. And so there's so much chaos, and this child internalizes this irrationality and this chaos, and they blame themselves for it. So again, they hold themselves guilty. Okay. Right, now let's look at unhealthy upbringing control styles. Okay. When we grow up, there's also some things controlling us, whether it's parents or teachers or friends or the society. We all grow up being controlled, so that's kind of like a fact of growing up. It's everybody goes through it. But there are unhealthy control styles that create significant wounding. So let's look at that. One control style is smothering. Smothering parents are terrified of being alone, and so they discourage their child's independence and they emotionally engulf them. They take independence as a personal attack. In an unhealthy way, they give too much attention. Okay? Now, in this table and in all the others that will follow, on the left we'll have the characteristics of the parents under this kind of control system, and then on the right we'll have consequences to the child under this kind of control system. So the parent here is overbearing, presents overbearing scrutiny of the child. The parent fears rejection, fears being alone, is unable to differentiate between their needs and the child's needs. The parent discourages the child's individuality, insists the child thinks and feels like they do, like the parent does, insists that all siblings become uniform or, in quote, the same and fit in, insists the children's values should be the same as the parents', insists that the children's lifestyle matches the parents'. The consequences to the child are lack of personal boundaries, intimacy and commitment issues, dependency, poor self-image, low initiative. The next style of unhealthy control is depriving. These parents believe in scarcity in various forms and believe that they can never get their needs met. So to compensate, they love conditionally. They deprive as a method of getting their needs met and otherwise manipulate and deprive love, attention, and provision to get kids to be who they want them to be. Okay? The characteristics of such a parent are control via withdrawal or banishment, being emotionally unavailable, believing that happiness and fortune are scarce and short-lived, considering love a commodity to be traded. They tell their children not to desire and not to have needs, make their children feel bad because feeling good threatens them, ignores or discounts a child's dreams and hopes, values rules over feelings, ignores or discounts the child's gifts and talents, and just emptiness as well. you know the consequences to the child are self-doubt. The child grows up doubting themselves, having low expectations, low confidence, depression, feeling unloving or unlovable, having poor social skills. By the way, if I don't know if you've noticed so far, but these control styles are not absolutes. In other words, you won't find one parent that is only depriving or only, they're kind of like mixtures that go into parenting. So a particular parent may have 2 or 3 different control styles, or maybe more, or maybe less, or maybe just one, or a mixture of 2, or a mixture of 5. So once again, we're talking of human beings. They're complex creatures, so we're just trying to simplify here. Another control style is perfectionistic parents. These parents are afraid to be seen as less than, and they are fixated on perfect order, perfect appearance, perfect performance, status, prestige, power. So they exert a lot of pressure to be perfect. They fear disorder, they fear untidiness and any kind of flaw. They are compulsive, they are obsessive, they are driven to the point of workaholism. Obsession, they have an obsession with what will the neighbors think. They're obsessed with appearances, status, achievement, material things. And they put on a lot of pressure to perform and excel. They worship status. The consequence to the child is the child grows up somewhat emotionally numb, or at least bottled up. The child values the self based not on their humanity, on who they are, but on their achievement, on their appearances, and so on, In other words, what they do. Not who they are, but what they do, and what they have, what they have achieved, So the child also is plagued with self-doubt. The child is compulsive. They tend to have depression, and they're obsessed with perfect emotions, perfect actions, perfect appearance, perfect thoughts, and so on. As you can see, that's something that would take so much energy from this child, especially when they grow up and they have to keep up this mask that they've had to wear when they were a kid, and they too become like their parent and they have to do, it's a real waste of energy and time. Another style is cult-like parenting. And again, remember, when we say parent, we're not just talking about mom and dad. We're also talking about societies, neighborhoods, economic classes, countries, even the planet itself, So parenting doesn't mean necessarily mom and dad. It means upbringing conditions. And by the way, before we go on, we're not doing this so we can blame them. Blaming them won't help you at all. Everybody is doing the best that they know how to do at that time, Maybe later somebody might look back and think, oh, what the hell was I thinking? But at the time, that's the best they can do. And besides, these are not personal things. These are inherited things that have been rolling with the planet for quite a long time. And so, it's not something to take personally. But it's important to be aware so that you can know how the machine works. So cult-like, these parents fear uncertainty. And they try to remain, in quotes, safe by being, in quotes, in the know. They do not tolerate uncertainties and thus tend to be militaristic or into religious, social, and corporate institutions that allow them to feel, in quotes, sure and special. These kind of parents tend to have strict rituals and beliefs. They have a fear of doubt and uncertainty. They have a fear of being questioned. They fear new ideas. They fear disagreement. and they look for safety in strict organizations and institutions. They're militaristic or fundamentalistic, if that's a word. They fundamentalism, yeah. Anyways, not sure what the right word is. Fundamentalistic. I don't think that's a word, but you understand what I mean. Uh, they hold some kind of fundamentalism. So it could be a religious fundamentalism, it could be class, it could be whatever. So the consequences to a child that grows up under such parenting is distrust, gullibility, and gullibility means they're easily fooled. This child tends to have low initiative, they have social isolation, they tend to have poor intellectual development, they tend to have a dogmatic spiritual life, and they seem to have a constant sense of fear, a foreboding, that dun 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 in their mind, like there's something terrible about to happen, that kind of thing. The next parenting style is a chaotic one, yeah, and these parents are internally unstable and confused. They therefore act unpredictably and offer chaotic messages and discipline. Once again, remember, a parent may be all chaotic, or they may have an aspect of their life that is chaotic, you see? So these things blend into each other somehow. Okay, now, the characteristics of such a parent is control through unpredictability and mystification. These parents has difficulty setting limits. They send confusing and mixed messages. They have bizarre reasoning, that just doesn't make sense sometimes. They're full of catch-22s and double blinds. They have a chaotic lifestyle. They have mood swings and extremes. And the consequences to the child are emotional confusion, emotional roller coaster experiences. The child tends to be hyper vigilant, unable to trust others. The child thinks that being crazy is normal, and they go through life as if walking on eggshells, because they never know what the chaotic parent will do. Is the parent gonna scream or hug them? So they don't know, if I take this action, is that gonna get me punished or rewarded? So they're always walking on eggshells, and they end up going through life like that as well. And they feel guilty for desiring independence or desiring closeness, because a chaotic parent is not going to give them independence or closeness, so the child ends up feeling guilty for feeling these things, okay? And it becomes part of their personality. The next chaotic parenting control style is using. These parents fear losing or looking beaten or defeated or wrong. They see other people's gains as their losses. So it's never a win-win. It's like, if you gain, that means I've lost. So they're always having that fight. Anyway, so they do whatever it takes to always be the winner. In quotes, they just have to win, have to throw in the last word, have the last say, have to have the last bite, have to win all the time. And so they even use their children emotionally, and or in other ways, so as to score points with the neighbors and to keep on winning, even if that goes against the child. And this kind of parent has a me first approach to life. They demand loyalty, obedience, admiration. They're afraid of losing. They're insensitive to other people's needs and feelings. They have serious emotional immaturity. They look at life and their children from the point of view of what can I get out of it? What can I get out of this kid? What can I get out of this situation? And they have a desperate need for self-esteem. Hence, their obsession with being worshipped. They are self-centered. They feel angry and betrayed when children develop their own personality. They are jealous. They have envy, plenty of it. They are unable to provide for themselves emotionally, and they are very narcissistic. The consequences of growing up under such control situations is that the person ends up with poor self-image, feeling used and expecting to be used. They have poor emotional self-care, and they see themselves as not lovable, and they allow others to use them. Abusing controlling style. These parents have a lot of resentment in them, and they take it out on others, including their children, by bullying and abusing them. Their rage and resentment makes them see even their children as threats, okay? And again, this could be not just a parent, it could be a society, it could be a country, a neighborhood, whatever. So the characteristics of such a parent is they have a do what I say or else approach to life. They use brute force. They feel that they have a right to abuse. They blame the child for making them abuse them. They have low impulse control. They are destructive. They are takers. They just take, take, take. They're not givers. The consequences to the child is that the child develops addiction, depression, hypervigilance. The child accepts abuse from others that believe, because they believe they deserve abuse. And they're unable to trust others. And they have low self-esteem. And the next control style is actually the childlike control style. That's a controlling style. And these parents feel incapable, and therefore they are unable to defend their children. Or they actually make their children assume the parenting role. Some parents actually make their children parent them, the parents. So the characteristics of such a parent is they have an I can't do it approach to life. They induce guilt in others so as to control them. They are unable to be an adult or to parent. They need to be cared for, and they are unable to protect their children. They are generally terrified and anxious. Consequences to the child include never having been a carefree child, always looking after the parent. Yeah, the child assumes the parenting role. They always put others first and ignore their own needs. They are unable to express resentment or express anger. To feel safe, they tend to choose relationships with people who are cult-like, using, abusing, or perfectionistic. So you can see how this, when we keep saying, how come I keep attracting the same partner? Or, those people who they try so many different partners and every single partner beats them. But when this partner goes to another relationship, this partner doesn't beat the new person. It's like, and so these people ask themselves, why is it that every boyfriend or every girlfriend that I get is violent? So you can start to see how the wound, the wound is attracting certain kinds of life partners. The wound is so powerful in human beings. This is probably the best thing you can do to learn how the wound operates, because it starts to fix your life. Not just in terms of abundance, but relationships, health, and so much more. Great. So next we are going to look at unhealthy upbringing control tools. So before we're looking at styles, now we're going to look at tools. Unhealthy upbringing control tools. So first of all, let's start with a list of tools. People control each other with quite an impressive array of things. People control each other with food, body control, boundary control, social control, decision control. Let me go slowly. Food control involves the type of food, maybe, or even the quantity of food, too much food or too little food. Body control literally is stopping somebody physically or making them do something physically. Boundary control is where, we all have our boundary. Sometimes people just disregard those boundaries and break them or whatever, or they erect their own walls. Social control, decision control, when somebody controls who you're allowed to see and all that, and also controls what you're allowed to think about and decide and so on. What speech control, what you're allowed to say or not say. Emotion control, what you're allowed to feel or not feel. Thought control, what you're allowed to think about or not think about. Very related to decision control. There's also bullying, depriving, confusing you, manipulating you. These are all ways to control you. And under manipulation, you got manipulating feelings. When somebody manipulates your feelings, your behavior, your thinking, your relationships, your identity, your sense of self, these are all control tools, okay? Now let's look at them in detail. Food control, examples are dictating what, when, and how children eat, or dominating the dinner table environment. Consequences include decreased autonomy, increased emotional problems, risk of eating disorders or addictive behavior, and poor self-image. Body control. Examples include excessive monitoring of body functions, attempts to dictate dress and personal grooming. Consequences include violations in sense of self, diminished free will, risk of distorted body image. Boundary control. Examples include micromanaging children's sleep habits, household duties, playtime, micromanaged to the T, It also includes violating children's privacy, Consequences include increased dependency, decreased emotional safety, feeling always under scrutiny, lowered expectations. Social control. Examples include interfering in choices of friends and dates, discouraging contact with non-family members. Results could include slowed individuation, distrust, gullibility, or distorted ideas about relationships and other people, lack of awareness of other people's values. Then we have decision control. Examples include dominating school, career, and major life choices, second-guessing or ridiculing children's choices. Results include slowed development of decision muscles, over-reliance on parents' views, increased self-doubt, ambivalence over achievement. Speech control. Examples include dictating when and how children speak, compulsively correcting grammar or forbidding certain words, prohibiting dissent or even question. You're not allowed to question me, that kind of thing. And the results include reduced initiative, slowed development of communication skills, bottled up feelings, reduced confidence. Emotion control. Examples include overriding, dictating, ridiculing, or discounting emotions. And results include reduced opportunities to learn how to cope with emotions, distorted ideas about how to express emotions, disconnection from a precious source of information about one's self, your innate, your intuition, and so on, your emotions. When you get disconnected from that, you really are getting disconnected from a precious source of information. Your emotions are literally carriers of information. Another result is confusion or intolerance when faced with other people's strong emotions. Thought control. Examples include attempts to regulate morals, values, and tastes, parental philosophies of life delivered as dogma, overzealous attempts to discourage new ideas. Results include slowed intellectual growth, focus on who's right and who's wrong rather than focusing on curiosity and on learning, reduced self-esteem, lack of awareness of other views. Bullying. Examples include physical or sexual violence or harassment, verbal or emotional abuse, intimidation, prohibiting children from defending themselves. Results include feelings of isolation and abandonment, increased risk of depression and anxiety, assumption that abuse is deserved and okay, poor impulse control, and risk of addictive behavior. Depriving. Examples include withdrawing affection and attention when displeased, withholding warmth and encouragement, depriving of safety and belonging. Results include feeling unlovable, increased dependency, reduced confidence, lowered expectations, greater willingness to accept mistreatment, increased risk of depression and anxiety. Confusing. Examples include unclear rules, mixed messages, erratic behavior, or baffling communication. Results include increased second-guessing of self, feeling isolated, hypervigilance and anxiety, difficulty making decisions or taking the initiative. Manipulating. Examples include shaming, scapegoating, and a host of other disingenuous techniques. Results include distrust of others, feeling valued for appearances instead of for being who you are, internalization of family worries that are not the children's to solve, and depression and rage. So there we go. Those are the upbringing conditions that tend to stifle or wound the inner child or the heart. So, once again, you don't need to figure out yours. You don't need to dig up old memories. You don't need to go blaming and accusing your parents of anything. Okay? You could do any of all of those things. That's up to you. That's your free will. But to heal, you don't need to do any of those. You simply need to know how the machine works, how you may have ended up where you are now. And this knowing is what's going to enable you to find forgiveness, understanding, insight, and most importantly, when we're going through the healing part and we're looking at mindfulness, you'll be able to start to very easily see how your own machine is working, how your body-mind complex is put together. And this is what's going to give you liberation, okay? Great. Now let's dive deeper and understand the structure and operation of the wound. We've talked about some of the ways how the wound happens, how wounding happens. But now that the wound has happened, let's start to understand how it actually then works. Okay? And the wound can be thought of as the sum total of how the wound is structured and how it operates. That can be thought of as the unconscious ego. So we've all heard about, the ego is in the way, people saying the ego is in the way, the ego is causing me problems and all that sort of stuff. It's a famous thing. It's a popular thing to say in the law of attraction circles and all that. But let's get real. Let's really understand what do we mean by the ego is in my way, or I just got to get out of my ego and all that sort of stuff. Because let me tell you this, there's nothing wrong with the ego. The ego is a very important component of humanity. It's not there by mistake. It wasn't an accident. It was put there by design. However, it can go unconscious and be run by the wound, which is what gives us problem. And it can wake up and reflect, if you'll allow me to use the word spirit, okay? The ego is what allows us to get that sense of separation. Separation is actually not real. It's a sensation. And that sensation of separation, identity, is a function of ego. If you don't have an ego, you actually wouldn't know where you'd feel united or one with everything, with the tree, with the grass, with everybody, and there would be you wouldn't realize that you're a drop in the ocean. You would not have the concept of drop versus ocean. It would all just be one super thing that is nothing and everything, at the same time. So the ego is literally what allows you to navigate space-time with that sensation of, in quote, separate self. It's a very ingenious structure. It even creates physics. It's a very powerful structure. You can't get rid of it. The only thing is, it can either be unconscious or awake, but you can't get rid of it. And there's no point hating it or acting like it's something you have to fix and kill or get rid of. Having said that, let's look at the structure and operation of it. And we're going to be looking at how we shield and defend the wound, how we soothe and numb it, how we attack others because of it, how it is actually the mother or the cause or the mechanism behind, that voice in our head, the self-talk, and in quotes, the bad feelings. And we'll also look at how it is actually a composition of unconscious beliefs, limiting beliefs, false truths. Now, before we dive in, I want to say one thing. this is something that once you get this, and again, you don't have to figure out how yours operates, you just need to understand how generally egos operate. Once you get this, you will be so far ahead when it comes to liberation and into being able to manifest abundance without blocking yourself. Okay, so let's get right into it, and we will start with the idea of shielding or defending. Now, think about this. If let's say you're gonna have a, let's say you knock your elbow or you knock your hand in some against something hard, and it starts to hurt, it starts to have some pain, it hurts. What would you do? You generally tend to shield that hurt, the wounded part, the part of your body that has been hurt. You try to shield it so that nothing touches it and causes you more pain, right? That's normal. Even a dog, even a cat, even a bird, even a snake, any creature that has been wounded will tend to shield the wound, will tend to protect the wound, will tend to defend against something touching the wound. Because when something touches the wound, it's going to hurt, right? It's going to hurt, man. And nothing wants to get hurt. So it's normal to shield your wound. Consciousness has physics. Even consciousness is shielding your inner wound. If you have a wounded heart, which we all do to one extent or another, we will automatically, if we're not aware and awake, we will tend to shield that wound. It's normal to do that, okay? Now let's look at how we do that. One way people shield, okay, I'll just go through the list. Denial is one shielding mechanism. Repression and suppression. Displacement, this one means venting out, So we kind of like, when somebody gets angry at you for no good reason, but they're actually venting out something that's going on in them, that's called displacement. And we have sublimation. This is compensation using money. This is very big. Okay, money, prestige, and perfectionism. Let's talk about this briefly. Yeah, many of us want to manifest money, and it's not necessarily to meet our needs. It is, sometimes it is, but quite often it's somehow to compensate for the wound in one or another. Prestige, perfectionism. I mean, there's so many people who are already millionaires, right? Maybe they have $1 million net worth, but it's not enough because, somehow they don't feel like, unless they have 10 million, unless they live in that particular neighborhood where their great uncle and auntie all live, or unless they achieve the same level of, whatever as their father did, or unless they have the same prestige like their mother did, unless they are perfect like they were, it's just not enough. So they keep working like crazy, trying to get more money, trying to get more prestige, whatever. What they're actually doing is shielding their wound. They're trying to compensate with these things. So even people in poverty, sometimes they're actually looking for money, yes, to get out of poverty. But when you ask them what their dream is, sometimes they're overshooting. They want to be like mega billionaires. So that they may be in poverty, but they're in their mind, the money they want is not even just get out of poverty and just become, in quotes, middle class. They actually want to be billionaires. And when you ask them why, it's because somehow the shame and the wound they had for being in poverty is eating at them, and they just somehow want to never be back there again, and so they want to do whatever it takes to get a lot of money. So, and I mention this because it's important for us to understand where our desires are coming from, okay? Because no amount of money will heal your wound, okay? Just ask anyone who's wounded and mega rich. They'll tell you that before they had money, yeah, life may not have been cool. And then they got money, more than enough money than they needed. But then, because they didn't address the wound, it never felt good enough. So, they had to get more and more of it, or maybe try and compensate in other ways. Now, there's nothing wrong with money. Money is perfect. It's nice, a good medium of exchange. But it's important to know why you're seeking it. Okay? Why? That is so important to understand the intent behind your desire. Okay? It will start to liberate you. It will start to empower you. So this is very important, okay, to understand. Sublimation. Is it a pure desire you have, or is it a desire so that you can sublimate a wound or an aspect of a wound? Let's keep going. Isolation is another way that people soothe or shield. Shield their wound. Isolation can take various forms, including silencing, being silent, being invisible, distancing oneself. Another way is people pleasing, distracting. We distract ourselves with everything from TV to, there's a million different ways we just kind of like want to stay busy, because the minute we have to just face ourselves with nothing to keep us distracted, we actually go crazy. So, because we can't look at the wound, or we refuse to. Rescuing and fixing others is another way to people use. Projection means assigning your own drama to somebody else. You say, "Ooh, that person hates me. They're looking at me like I'm not good enough." Maybe the person hasn't even noticed you exist, but you hate yourself and you don't think you're good enough, so you think the other person is thinking what you're thinking. That's called projection. Intellectualizing means avoiding emotions by going intellectual. Rationalization means explaining yourself, your behavior, a way, instead of saying, "Look, man, I should not have acted that way towards you." You kind of explain it away, or you give an excuse. "Oh, it's just because I was tired and drunk that I did that bad thing," or something, to you. Excuses. That's rationalization. Regression means reverting to childhood patterns. Escapism, dissociating, complying, outdoing. Outdoing is the idea that, let's say, like somebody told you you should dress smartly, and so that maybe may have hit a wound. So now you overdress smartly. You outdo. You go way, way too much. Rebelling, and so on. There are many others. So that was we were in shielding and defense, and now we're going to go to soothing and numbing. Before we get into it, again, with the example of an animal, a wounded animal, let's say like a wounded dog, for example. If a dog has become wounded, it will shield its wound. It will try to defend its wound so that no one and nothing touches that wound and causes further pain. It will also try to soothe the wound, maybe to lick the wound. That's a form of soothing. It will try to numb the wound if possible, maybe dip it in water. So we are all creatures, and all creatures will tend to do this to wounds. And whether those wounds are physical or they're emotional, internal, whatever, metaphysical wounds. So we do this. And how do we soothe and numb ourselves? We use drugs. We use drugs and alcohol, sex, drama, relationships, food, overwork, workaholism, addictions, compulsions, media, TV, films, news, games, whatever, self-mutilation, self-punishment, and so on. Now, I know the last one is kind of look funny, self-mutilation, self-punishment. How is that a form of soothing? Well, some people feel so shamed and guilty that guilt is eating at them, and the only way they can feel better is to punish themselves. So that's why they self-punish or self-mutilate, to kind of like scratch at that guilt itch. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So it is a method of numbing and soothing. Now, another aspect of the structure and operation of the wound is that the wound literally creates a sensation of separation. The illusion of separation is increased the deeper a wound is. Okay? And with separation comes attack. The idea that an attack will somehow serve the purposes of the wound, or one way or another. So people attack others all the time, and they attack them by judging them, by being prejudiced against them, by even being physically violent against them, and so on. People also attack themselves, and they also attack life. So these are all operations of a wound. It does that naturally. Okay. So when you find your behavior going a certain way, this is very much an indicator of the wound itself, an unconscious wound. Talking of which, let's now talk about the next aspect of our wounds, structure and functioning of our wounds, which is unconscious beliefs, or rather false truths. What's a false truth? A false truth is whereby somebody says, this is a fact of life, but it's bullshit, but they believe it's true. That's a false truth, you know. Also called filters. Now let's see why that is so and how these work as well. So we've already talked about upbringing and how that conditions and programs a person. So I wanted to stress here that this programming, this conditioning actually creates a not self, a false self, a mask, okay? This conditioning happens, as you can see right there in front of you, screen, with the example of the dog. This is how you train a dog to come when you ring a bell, to come for lunch or dinner or food, okay? Before a dog is conditioned, if you ring a bell, the dog wouldn't really, know that it's time to eat. It's going to hear the bell, but it's not going to mean food. And then, when you show the dog a piece of meat, the dog starts to salivate and knows, ooh, it's time for food. When you show the dog a piece of meat and ring the bell, the dog starts to associate the meat and the bell together with its salivation. And if you do it enough times, the dog completely, it could be a mile away, and it hears the bell and immediately it starts to salivate, even if there's no piece of meat around. You see, that's what conditioning does. It changes the self. It creates a not self. It literally creates a mask, and all of a sudden the person or the thing, the creature, is no longer seeing reality. It is instead seeing its conditioning. Now the dog is viewing life through its conditioning. The dog is no longer viewing life through, it's not really seeing life, it's seeing its conditioning. You see what I'm saying? And that's what we've just talked about. And conditioning happens through reward and punishment, reinforcement and punishment, reward and punishment, all sorts of rewards and all sorts of punishments. Okay, that is how conditioning happens. In other words, it's when two or more stimuli happen together. So for example, the reward happens with an action that you took, or the punishment happens with an action that you took, or a thought that you had, or a feeling that you had. So now what happens is you become conditioned that every time this thought or action or feeling comes up, you will get the equivalent punishment or reward, and it becomes trained in you even after you grow up, and that's how people develop patterns, habits, phobias, all sorts of crazy things going on inside them. Now, just like in the example here with the dog, see, the dog is being conditioned with meat and a bell. So the meat is a resource that the dog needs, and that is why it is interested enough to pay attention to the point whereby you can then easily condition it with a bell. The dog doesn't give a damn about the bell, it cares about the meat. You see, the meat is a resource. So conditioning happens with reward and punishment, reinforcement, when resources are involved. Okay? When resources that you need are involved. Remember when we talked about wounding happening when an unmet, one of your needs is not met? Okay? So when your needs are not met, And then you end up developing an identity around that need not being met. That's when conditioning happens. Now, I want to expand that idea and talk about resources in general. The resources that we all need, we all require, and how, when they are met or not met, how that conditions and programs us to either expect those resources or not to expect them or whatever. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because abundance is actually the availability of the resources that we need. Okay, abundance does not mean money. Money is just one aspect of abundance. Abundance is a very holistic idea. It involves resources. Poverty also does not mean the lack of money. That's just one symptom of poverty. Poverty is the lack of resources that are required for normal function. When these resources go missing, then dysfunction arises. But now I want us to look at these resources in light of conditioning, in light of the structure and operation of a wounded heart, an unconscious ego. Okay, so let's start. Spiritual resources. This is possibly the most important resource. I believe it is the most important resource that every human being requires. Now, spirituality is not about religion, okay? It is simply about your self-view. What do you believe you are? I didn't even say who, I said what do you believe you are? And it's also about yourself, your worldview, which is what do you believe the world is? What do you believe life is? Now, this can take a vast range of answers, okay? Some of those answers become religions. Some don't. I mean, it's a very personal thing. But at the end of the day, it literally is about your self-view and your worldview, okay? So the extent one believes in divine purpose and guidance and having a future story, or in other words, hope, is determines how abundant or not that person will be, okay? So if the person was raised to believe that they have purpose and they are well guided by something bigger than them, they seem to be healthier than a person who was raised believing that they're a meaningless piece of flesh walking the earth just waiting to die, okay? And there is no hope or future story or whatever. You see what I'm saying? So lack of this resource can cause a person to see themselves as someone who doesn't matter, somebody who's insignificant, hopeless, useless, incapable, valueless, alone, okay? The spiritual resources of hope, self-worth, and optimism are perfect antidotes for fear and scarcity. Very important, right? So, once again, ask yourself, how was this resource handled in your upbringing? And what was your conditioning and programming about it? And how is it operating now? Okay? Especially now, the present moment. How is that operating? How is your conditioning and programming in relation to this resource operating now? The next one is emotional. It's the second most significant resource. An emotionally healthy person is not necessarily a person who is happy and strong all the time. Instead, emotionally healthy person is a person who has embraced emotional vulnerability under all circumstances and has learned to flow without blocking themselves or exploding. When a person blocks themselves emotionally or explodes in an attempt to kill the emotional trigger, they end up becoming unconscious and they engage in behavior that is destructive to themselves or others. Or they keep returning to old patterns and repeating old patterns. They become stuck in time, which means they cannot leave their drama. They become doomed to repeating the past. They are unable to choose a new response. They are unable to embrace anything new. They are trapped in a box. They are unable to leave that box and to find abundance in the infinite variety of life. In many ways, emotional blockages can hinder a person or a society from accessing any or all of the other resources fully. Emotions can either liberate you or entrap you, depending on how you choose to flow with them or to block them. And that is largely based on what you learned from your relationships. Guilt and shame are especially notorious for keeping people trapped, and forgiveness is a known remedy for those. This is where, by the way, subconscious programming and conditioning really comes into play at the emotional resource level. The next one is relationship. Relationships are largely what condition and program a person, especially in childhood. Think about that. It's your relationship to your parents, your friends, your family, your neighborhood, your teachers, your environment, your society, So they include relationships with society as a whole: family, friends, teachers, like we said, neighbors, the country, the planet, the particular planet that you find yourself on. That's a relationship too. Your relationship with the earth, with Gaia, is part of that. you know so poverty here is a lack of access to relationships with individuals or societies that nurture, that liberate and enhance our emotional and other resources in ways that allow us to grow vibrantly and freely, without engaging in destructive behavior, without sabotaging ourselves, and without having fearful boundaries. So once again, how were your relationships as you grew up? When you look at it as a big picture, how has that conditioned and programmed you, and how does that operate now? This is a resource. How strong or not strong, or healthy or not healthy is this resource, in the way you have been programmed and conditioned to see it and to experience it? Mental cognitive resources. This is also called education. But when we say education, we just don't mean education in school. Street smarts, life education. These are all mental cognitive resources as a whole. So this is the learned skill and ability to think creatively, to imagine, to solve problems cognitively. Unfortunately, thinking is often a result of conditioning, programmed by society, by relations. When a person is programmed and conditioned to think in abundant ways, they experience abundance. When they are programmed to think in limiting ways, they experience limitations. And by the way, that is not just about money, that includes money, but everything else: love, creativity, XYZ, So abundance is a much bigger picture than just finances. Of course, it includes finances, but that's just one tiny aspect of abundance. Now, fortunately, thinking is a skill that can be learned. It can be practiced. It can be reprogrammed. It can be healed. Just as emotions can be healed. It simply requires deliberate awareness and practice. Positive and procedural self-talk is a healthy and important aspect of mental resources. It is the voice in your mind that talks you successfully through the tasks that you need to handle in your life. Okay? Many people in poverty, again, we're not just talking about money, we're talking about all sorts of poverty, have a very limited collection of positive and procedural self-talk. And this means that many tasks are either never started, never finished, or they're done incorrectly or inadequately. For example, if a person had experience and role models that taught him or her how to handle money, or how to handle love, or how to handle relationships, or how to handle anything, farming, whatever, they won't know how to. So this is the learned ability to practice, to precisely define situations, to precisely define things, people, and so on, and then use that precise thinking to recognize opportunities and to transcend challenges. That is mental cognitive resource, or otherwise known as education, and it's not just about school. So, again, what kind of programming and conditioning did you undergo in this framework, the mental cognitive framework or resource? And finally, we get to financial resources. And again, this is about having money, of course, to purchase goods and services, but it is beyond that. It goes way beyond that. It's also how to handle money, what to do with it. And even more important, it's about having unrestricted access to the right kind of money. There's so many ways a monetary system can be built. It can be built to be debt-based. It can be built to be based on assets, such as gold. It can be built to have the money issued by the public, or it can be issued by private banks. Our current monetary system is actually debt-based, and 96% of the money we use is actually issued by private banks. People think it's government issued. It's not. The government only makes the notes and the coins, which is 4% of the money in circulation. 96% is actually issued by private banks, and it is based on debt. So that, relative to other possibilities, is not a healthy kind of a monetary system. So financial resources is not just, I got money, I borrowed it from a loan shark. It's not. That's not cool, you know, because sooner or later you're gonna have to pay the loan shark, you know. So the quality of the money, the kind of money, your ability to handle it, all these things form financial resources. Okay, and if we are conditioned and programmed to expect good quality money, to expect unrestricted access to good quality money, then we are abundant. If we're conditioned to expect access which is restricted, and it is restricted access, and it is restricted access to debt-based money, then we're kind of digging our own grave there, you know. There's nothing wrong with money. It depends on how you structure it, okay? Because not all money is the same. For true abundance, we need a monetary system designed for freedom, not for enslavement to debt. Money is a tool for exchange, but when it is used as a tool for indenture, for indebtedness, and for control, then really we've kind of like, although we're dealing with money, it's not good kind of money. You know what I mean? We need to expect and use the right kind of money, healthy money. Support systems are yet another resource, and these mean having friends, family, or other situations, institutions that act as a backup, and they are available for us in times of need when we require help. And we might need all sorts of help. It could be emotional help, financial help, coping strategies. We might need advice. We might need baby care. Maybe we need to run down to the shop and do something, or to meet somebody, and we need somebody to help us look after our baby. Is there somebody who can just easily do that? Or we have nobody, so we have to actually pay for baby care because we have nobody that can help us out. That kind of like, imagine somebody who has a job, they're a single mother, they don't have money for baby care, and they don't have friends and family who can look after that kid. This person is kind of screwed because they have to go to work, but they have a baby. So you see, that resource is part of the abundance, We might also need help solving problems, or even thinking about how to solve a problem, or even just somebody, a sounding board that, to talk with. So this is very much a part of our conditioning, because if we have been brought up and conditioned to feel shameful of asking for help, or to distance ourselves from others, then we deny ourselves this very important resource. And this ties in very closely with spiritual resources, because again, the support system can be non-physical. And it also ties in very closely with relationship resources, because obviously support systems are, part of the relationships that we have in life. So again, this is part of our programming and our conditioning, this resource, Language is another resource, and this is the ability to use language with precision, okay? Because it affects how you think, how you communicate with others, how you organize concepts in your mind, how you communicate those concepts. It helps you navigate life richly, because life is all about meaning. Relationships are about meaning, communication is about meaning, but meaning has value only to the extent that it can be shared, to the extent that it can be communicated, Also, the kind of language patterns used is very important. For example, were you brought up with shaming language and ridiculing language, or were you brought up with supporting, encouraging, and nurturing language? So in that way, how do you talk to yourself? Because you tend to talk to yourself the way you were raised. Do you talk to yourself in a shaming and ridiculing way? Do you say like, oh, I'm so stupid, look at how stupid I am? Do you say that? Or do you go like, you've done well today. You've achieved a lot. Very good. You deserve a rest. You deserve a break. You deserve a massage. You know? How do you... So language is another resource, and it's again part of our programming and conditioning. And all this happens on a personal level, on a community level, on a societal level, on a planetary level. Okay? So you see, we're all connected. And all this can be generational, meaning somebody can grow up in generational wealth or generational poverty or generational abuse or generational, you see, so several generations until they don't know anything else. Even their parents and their grandparents know only that. It could also be situational, meaning somebody may have been raised in, let's say, like a wealthy family, but for some reason they're down on their luck for 1 or 2 years, but they'll be fine again. So that's a situational kind of or maybe as a child, look at what's going on in Syria now. A lot of kids grew up in peace in Syria for quite a while. It was nice and peaceful and all that. And so, they've been growing up in peace. And then all of a sudden, a situation happened. The war in Syria happened. And so now they have a situational event that is conditioning and programming them in a certain way. So it's not generational, such as the people who've grown up in generations of war, such as in Israel and Palestine. That's a generational thing. Every generation just, it just keeps going. But in Syria, we can say it was situational. Or it could be institutional, meaning an institution has been erected to condition and program people in this particular way. So if you get rid of the institution, then you'll get rid of that problem too. So as you can see, these are, when you start to look at people and the planet in a certain way, certain, pictures start to emerge. Now, I'd like us to think of conditioning and programming as something that creates a set of filters. Okay, and these filters literally prevent us from experiencing infinity. And what they do is they filter out infinity and only allow in a very, very, very tiny, finite experience to come through to us. Okay? That's what conditioning and programming does. It's literally, and that's why we face this resistance. When we say, "Oh, the law of attraction is not working for me. I can't seem to manifest." What you're saying is, "I've got a filter." That's what you're saying. I've got a filter, and this filter came in because of my conditioning, my programming, as I grew up. Okay, so let's look at this list of filters and start to see what a few of them. I've got 11 listed here. So we're calling them preset filters is because when you go into a situation and you've got a filter, that situation will always be seen through the eyes of your filter. It will always be expressed through the eyes of your filter. And your reaction to that situation will always be conditioned by your filter. The results will always be in line of your filter. So it's kind of like, remember we said, literally having a wound, you're going through life experiencing your wound. You're not actually experiencing ultimate reality. You're experiencing your wound. You're experiencing your sense of self, your identity. That's why you can't seem to manifest outside of that identity until you face the identity and you understand what it's composed of, and then you let go of various aspects of it that were filtering out reality and preventing you from achieving what it is that you had desired. Only then will you manifest without restriction. That's why they're being called filters. Now, let's look at 11 filters that have been produced, that are known to be produced from conditioning and programming. Okay, filter number 1. The future is judged and conditioned by history, by your past. And so the consciousness of the past becomes the consciousness of the future. I think this is so easy to understand. We kind of just expect. In fact, let's put it this way. If I had to tell you something that is true, but that is so unlike anything you've ever experienced in your life, you're very likely to tell me, Dave, you're lying. Even though what I might be saying is true, because you will actually judge it against your past. And if it's so alien to your past experiences, you'll conclude that I'm lying. You believe your past so much that you'd rather say that anything that doesn't fit that box is a lie. Not you, everybody. That's kind of like part of human nature until somebody becomes awake and decides, you know what, I'm going to be open-minded, I'm going to not defend myself, I'm going to allow change, whatever. So preset filter number 2 is the fear of the future. This comes from, just the eons of, habit of destruction, generation upon generation that we see around us, but also within our own individual life. We kind of fear the future because, we're like, you know what, last year this happened to me. I hope it doesn't happen next year, So there's this fear of the future as well because of, once again, it's linked to number 1, because of the past, okay? Our past experiences. Preset filter number 3 is socialization. Our behavior is molded by socialization, okay? So that we tend to expect what our society expects. You see what I'm saying? Or what our race expects, or what our community, or our income group, our income class expects, okay? So in a way, we are kind of like trying to fit in, but this so-called fitting in is a filter, okay? Then we have the fear of the unknown. We have the expectations of our particular gender, the training of our gender, whether you're male or female. Like a lot of men are told, don't be emotional, don't cry. So this poor guy literally needs to cry and be emotional, but they're not allowed to by the society. Then, sometimes you find women, they've been told, be this kind of a good girl, behaves like this and that. And that becomes a filter. It starts to hinder that woman's experience of infinity. Another filter is the bias of logic. Yes, logic is a filter because it is largely built on past experiences. So when somebody says, oh, no, I want scientific logical proof, it'll never happen because infinity can never fit a tiny little box called personal logic. It's a filter. Very closely related to that is the bias of our education, the filter of our education, because it traps us into the training and the expectations of our particular schooling. If you're trained as a doctor, you tend to view life through that filter. If you're trained as a lawyer, a policeman, a nurse, or whatever, that becomes another filter. All these are ways you're being conditioned, you see, by the expectations of your various experiences. Yeah. Are you starting to see that we're not really free? We think we're free, but we're not. And once we realize this, then that's when freedom really starts. We realize how not free a lot of us are because of all this programming. So next filter is survival consciousness. Okay, this is our sense of safety, survival, and it includes control issues, ownership issues, and in issues or ways or behaviors. It doesn't have to be negative, but it involves safety, survival, control, ownership, and source of abundance beliefs. What we believe about those things. Okay, that's all comes under survival consciousness. It is large. It is completely based on the illusion of separation, and it creates the illusion of scarcity. Another filter is, I'm going to call it fear versus love. This is the idea that our awareness can be haunted by our fears. And this is called haunted awareness, shadows, living the shadows dream. So when we allow our fear, especially our fear of fear, fearing what we fear, fearing fear itself, then, that just becomes a filter that blocks so much away from us, okay? Another filter is our bias against spirituality. Everyone has some kind of bias against spirituality, Okay, everybody has some kind of bias. Some of them are so totally biased. Some of them are a little bit biased. Some are biased in this way, but not in that way. Whatever. We all have some kind, and this involves how we see the creator and our relationship to the creator. Okay, so it can come from, it can run the spectrum from there is no such thing as a creator. We just happen to be here, which I don't know why somebody thinks that, but anyways, that could be a valid thought for somebody, that there is, there is no creator at all. All the way to the other um, end of the spectrum, which is I and the creator are one, not theoretically, but as a living knowingness. So there's a person who actually says yes, there's a creator, and there's no separation between the creator, the created, and the act of creation, and actually feels it 100% totally, not just thinks about it logically, you see. So between those two ends, you can see there's a very wide spectrum of so many things that could happen. Could be like there's 10 million creators, there's only one creator, there's no creator. This is my kind of relationship with that creator, or these creators, whatever it is. That sense of what you believe about yourself and your world, that's spirituality. Okay, and it is a filter of some kind, depending on your particular blend. And in some ways, in some circles, there's actually a definite fear of enlightenment. And this fear is actually coming from the ego. The ego, the unconscious ego, literally knows that its end, its identities are going to disappear the minute enlightenment comes. And so it feels fear, and then you think that that fear is your fear, but it's not, So, but it still acts as a filter. Another filter is what we can call karma. I don't want to talk about this too much, because karma is one of those things that some say yes, it exists, some say no, it doesn't exist. So I don't want to insist that it exists. I believe in it. I believe that karma is energy that is carried with you as a result of parallel life experiences, in quotes, let's call them past lives, and pulled forward, into this particular incarnation. And it is an energy of unfinished business. So I don't think it's a way of punishing somebody for what they were before. So there's nothing to do with punishment and reward in karma. It's more about like an unfinished energy. The experiment continues. It didn't end in the last lifetime. It carries on this lifetime. But again, that's, I don't want to insist on that. But that's a filter, at least to me, the way I see it. Now, these filters all work especially strongly when they are attached to guilt and shame. Guilt and shame are terrible glues. Shame tends to make you hide. When you hide, the problem remains. You see, secrecy is an aspect of shame. Shame, therefore, becomes the glue that binds you to suffering. Guilt is a very close cousin to shame. They both work in the same way, right? So when there's guilt and shame, these filters become extremely strong. Okay? And so now you start to see how our self-concept is formed. It literally is an idea, a sense of self that is formed through programming and conditioning that happens as we experience life, as we relate to life. Okay? There really is no, when you say who are you, oh, my name is David, I'm like this, I'm like that, I'm from this place, these are my plans. This sense of self is a bunch of conditioned programs, So the question is, can I survive if I let go of that sense of self? Will I still be able to survive? Of course. The sense of self is not a requirement for survival or even for thriving, okay? So this starts to allow you to give yourself permission to let go, to be willing to embrace uncertainty, to see what lies beyond the walls of your programming and your conditioning, because you can see that was what you think you are is just an arbitrary collection of identities that are reactionary to programming and conditioning. And if some of them are actually in the way of your happiness, of your abundance, or whatever, then you're not betraying anybody by letting them go, and you're not facing any real danger, although it might feel like. It's actually, you feel lighter when you know that. That you can be free. You can let it all go. It's not like it wasn't preordained that you have to be this way. You literally collected sensations of self, identities, through how you interacted with life. You see? So, let's just summarize this and say that conditioning, programming, and socialization involve participation in your community, whether that community is your family, your neighborhood, your country, or your planet. Through your involvement in the community, you end up practicing their rules, their behaviors, about their beliefs about self and the world. And these are unspoken rules and published rules. Some things are very overt. You're actually told, don't do this or be like that. But some of them are not even spoken, but you somehow sense them and they become part of you. Maybe it's part of the way your particular economic class behaves, or your particular whatever. Now, that participation, that practice is actually holistic. It involves all aspects of life, from physical to emotional to mental to spiritual and so on. In all subjects of life, including relationships, perception of abundance or poverty, and so on. Furthermore, this participation results in you creating an identity or a set of identities that is actually in relation to your community. Your identity is not what you really are. Instead, your identity is a made-up construct that you put together over time to be accepted by your community, to be able to eat, to be able not to go to jail, to gain love and support from them, to fit in, and sometimes you even do it to rebel against them. So your identity is not what you really are, yet this identity is running your life. This is what is called conditioning, programming, socialization. It makes you live life unconsciously, asleep. Okay? But you can awaken. You can be free. The important lesson to take away from all this is that your beliefs, in other words, your hidden rules, your subconscious conditioning, these are what determine your life experiences. Okay? No amount of hard work or struggle will cancel the automatic manifestation of your beliefs. If you believe you're not safe in life, no amount of hard work and struggle will fix that, except actually letting go of that belief. That's the only thing that will fix it. And so to change your life experience, you have to change your beliefs, your conditioning. Without this inner change, this inner transformation and growth, no amount of external hard work will significantly change your life experience on the long term. And so you start to see that it's not really about doing. It's not about what you're doing or what you're not doing. It is about being. Being. Be, do, have. Being is what then creates doing. It's what then creates having. In fact, even without doing, being is equal to having. Because being creates, being manifests. Being is a 24/7 vibrational offering that is coming out of you and is being answered by the universe 24/7. Who and what are you being at each and every moment? Consciously and subconsciously. And these exercises that we're doing now are there to help us bring the subconscious into the conscious. Okay? So you see how important this is? Right, now let's talk about the voice in my head. The self-talk. We all have it. We all have this. We're all chattering to ourselves in our mind. Okay? I'm not talking about like madness or some kind of like whoa voice, woo woo voice. No, I'm talking about self-talk. that everybody has this running commentary in their brain. And that's what I'm talking about here. The voice in my head, the self-talk, and the bad feelings, in quotes. Now, we've already talked about what the ego is. The voice in my head is actually what personifies the ego. It's what gives it that aspect of being a person, being an identity. Okay? Literally, the voice in your head is what is sustaining the ego. And it is also coming from the ego. You can say it's kind of like a chicken and egg, which came first situation. But that's what it is. It is a carrier. The voice in the head is the actual carrier of that separated sense of self that is called the ego. Okay? And more accurately, the unconscious ego. You can actually live a full life without that voice in your head. The voice in your head is not actual thoughts. When you finally experience your real thoughts, you realize that the voice in your head is not thoughts. The voice in the head is simply programmed chains of narrative, of syntax. Think about it. You keep thinking the same shit over and over and over again. Human beings have 50,000 thoughts, and 80 to 90% of them are repetitive. The same stuff you thought yesterday, ooh, oh my God, this is going to happen, or oh my God, I should have done that, or whatever it is. It's the same stuff you'll think tomorrow, the next day. It just seems to change clothes a little bit. In other words, same shit, different day, or same shit, different flies, or whatever it is. It's like the same old thing, okay? So these are not your real thoughts. These are like pictures and snapshots from the past, and also pictures and snapshots recreated for the imagined future based on the past. You see? These are not your real thoughts. Real thoughts are very present moment. And the brain is actually built to calculate what is immediately in front of you in the present moment. For example, if you're having a coffee, the brain is designed to help you stretch out your hand, grab that cup of coffee, by judging the distance and all that, making sure it's not too hot or too cold, bring it to your mouth and so on. The brain is designed for navigating through 3D. It's not really designed to plan your life and run your life. It's not. It's not capable of, because it can't even see what's coming next. But the ego uses it as a facility to maintain that sense of false self by repeating the drama, loops and loops and loops and loops that came from conditioning, from everything that we've been seeing so far. You see what I'm saying? That identity is using the voice in your head to be the identity. Now, we'll very briefly cover this because I've actually covered it in a separate course called Radical Mindfulness. So here I'll just mention it. I won't talk too much about the voice in the head. Here we'll just mention it for the purposes of healing. And to heal, you simply need to start to notice how the voice in your head works. Again, the voice gives us a false sense of self, an identity. And it is built, and this is built on conditioning, on programming, okay? That's where do you think the thoughts, in quotes, the thoughts in the voice in your head come from? They come from what you've been programmed to think, or what you've been programmed and conditioned and reacted against, or made conclusions against, or whatever. They come from conditioning, okay? So, notice these three things that are present in everybody's self-talk. First, there's the same old thing, which means 90% of our thoughts are repetitive. Literally, it's a case of here we go again. Same shit, different day. Same drama, different mama. So it's repetitious, negative. The presence of repetitious, negative thoughts is a sure indicator of subconscious false beliefs. That's where they're coming from. Okay? So that's called the same old thing. Next, notice the bad feelings. Again, this is in quotes because the feelings are just feelings. They're not bad. It is we who conclude, ooh, I don't like feeling angry, or I don't like feeling happy, joyful, or I don't like feeling compassionate. That makes me feel weak. There's nothing bad about any of these things, whether it's anger or sadness or happiness or compassion. It is an individual who labels a particular feeling as bad. So that's why I put them in quotes. There is no such thing as a bad feeling. So anyways, these so-called bad feelings, they give us a sense of reality and justification to the same old thing, to the voice. In other words, they seem to match the voice, or the voice seems to match the feeling. So we're like, I must be feeling bad because, so they give reason, a sense of reality to the voice or something. So our bad feelings form, they only form. In other words, we only categorize feelings bad in areas where our beliefs are out of alignment with truth. Okay? Anytime, like, you are out of alignment with ultimate truth, universal truth, you'll feel, in quotes, bad. Okay? Whether, let's say, for example, you believe that, oh, I'm not good enough. That idea doesn't make you feel nice, right? And so when you don't feel nice, you know that the idea, I'm not good enough, is not true. It's an illusion. Okay? So every time you feel bad, just take it as an indicator that you have identified with an illusion, or with a lie, and that is what is creating suffering. Emotions are actually designed to give you guidance. They are a guidance system. Emotions are a guidance system. That's why it is said, follow your bliss. When you feel good, it shows that you're in alignment. When you feel bad, it shows that your belief or your thinking is currently out of alignment with truth. So let's say you worry about money and how you're going to make it through the day. It doesn't feel good, right? But you think it's true. I'm not going to make it tomorrow because I don't have money, that kind of thing. Well, it may look 100% true. It may feel true. There may actually be somebody down at the front, at your front door, demanding money, a payment from you that you don't have. And all this may look so super real. But trust me, it's based on a lie. Not the lie that there's somebody at your front door, not the lie that you owe somebody money, but that sense that you won't survive the moment, or that sense that there's something wrong with you because of this situation, or that sense, so many different layers here. So the bad feeling is an indicator of an allegiance with an illusion, hence the suffering. Then the third thing to notice when it comes to the voices in my head is this sensation of I, me, mine, my. You see, that kind of identity thing. Anywhere where you have built a sense of identity around any concept or any emotion or any thought or whatever, whether that is what you might classify as good or bad, okay? As long as there's a sense of separate identity, it is a sure indicator of an allegiance with a subconscious belief, an illusion rather. And identities, sense of self, they're only created when somebody has created an attachment or a resistance to something. That's when a self is created, or rather a sensation of a self, an identity. There are so many things that happen in the world that you really don't care about. You have no awareness that they even exist, or even if you're aware, you really couldn't be care less for or against them. You're completely neutral to them, or you're completely unaware of them. And in those things, you have not created an identity for or against them. You have no position, and you're fine with either or, and you actually don't have an identity in relationship to these things. You see what I mean? So identity always indicates a place where you've separated, you've literally categorized life and said, I'm for or against it, or whatever, you see? Great. So in summary, to avoid future wounding, we bury our true self and replace it with a false self, a mask, an unconscious ego. Okay? Because we say, oh my God, last time I felt this way, or I thought this, or I did this, I was punished or I was hurt. So I will never do that again. So what has happened? We have just replaced our natural movements with an identity designed to suppress us from expressing that natural movement. Okay? We've buried our true self and replaced it with a false self, a mask. So our societies, our families, institutions, countries, religions, etc. all tell us, hey, wear this mask or else you shall be punished, or you shall be abandoned, or you shall be fired, or you shall be excommunicated, or you shall be denied. Or even positively, wear it, wear this mask and we shall reward you, we shall pay you, we shall, you see what I'm saying? We shall love you, we shall accept you, and so on. So the false self or the mask is based on fear. It doesn't generate life, and instead it usurps life from your true self. It's actually taking energy from your true self to power itself, and that's why it's wasting you. Okay, so the false self is all about pretending. It's inhibited, it is shaming, it is blaming, it is contracting, it is fearful, it is unauthentic, it is split, it is anxious, and so on. But what it isn't is that it isn't real. It is simply a collection of beliefs, a collection of programs that manipulate our awareness. They manipulate our creating. They manipulate our experience. The false self, these identities, they're not real. They just, think of them as computer codes, programs, okay? Collections of beliefs that have been buried and hidden, and they're just manipulating our awareness and experience. And sadly, we spend most of our time, our energy, our attention, our thoughts, our emotions on our false self. That's our core focus. The wound takes so much. It literally consumes much of our lives. And this is what causes suffering. This is what makes it appear as if we are failing to manifest our desires, as if we are failing to have abundance, and so on. And that is because the false self itself manifests life experiences that match it. So for example, if the false self says, I'm not good enough, it will keep manifesting life experiences that match that idea that I'm not good enough. And if this person with that kind of a concept is trying to become abundant and earn more or whatever it is, they will sabotage themselves because they believe they're not good enough. But it's not that they'll even directly sabotage with themselves. They may even try hard. They may even work like a dog 12, 15 hours a day. But it's going to fail because that overall core vibration of I'm not good enough is creating everything around that effort. So that effort becomes so weak compared to that 24/7 core vibration that no amount of hard work will actually help. Awakening is the only answer. Awakening to what we really are. In other words, letting go of these false selves is the only true answer. Healing is the only true answer.
Alright, if you like that, here are 7 more things for you. Number 1, download the free Awaken Your Avatar report. Number 2, take free trials of our self and world mastery courses. 3, download the free A Happy Pocket Full of Money illustrated book. 4, help me make more videos faster by supporting me on Patreon, and I'll reward you with some very, very cool perks. 5, subscribe, comment, and share this video. 6, get our cool merchandise like t-shirts, hats, mugs, and book recommendations. 7, help translate these videos captions if you can. Thank you very much and see you later.